Muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos a esta rueda de prensa con uno de nuestros invitados especiales de esta 15ª edición del Festival Internacional de Cine de Morelia, y quiero empezar presentando a Natalia Lever, directora del Climate Reality Project, que es un proyecto del que nos va a hablar ella, con el que el vicepresidente Gore entrena activistas en distintas partes del mundo. Así que les pido un aplauso para recibir a Natalia Lever. Gracias. Bienvenida, Natalia. Y ahora démosle la bienvenida al señor Al Gore, como saben, Premio Nobel de la Paz y un muy querido amigo de México. Bienvenido, señor vicepresidente. Un aplauso también, por favor. Muchas gracias. Y vamos a empezar esta sesión, que el formato es que va a iniciar con una conversación entre Natalia y el vicepresidente Gore para después abrirlo a sus preguntas. Así que, Natalia.
Mr. Gore, I want to start saying you how much I admire your work, your passion, and your dedication. Thank you for being here to share with us your new project, An Inconvenient sequel, Truth to Power. So An Inconvenient Truth got everybody talking about climate change, and since then we've seen a huge shift in policy. And now An Inconvenient sequel invites us to pass from climate policy to climate action. So I want to ask you, who do you think should watch this movie? Is it for politicians, activists, regular people?
Well, gracias, Natalia. Gracias a ustedes for being here. Forgive me for not speaking in Spanish. Hablo español, pero solamente un poquito. And thank you, Alejandro, for your hospitality and for what you've done with this magnificent film festival. I hope that this movie will be seen by people in all of the groups that you mentioned. It is aimed mainly at the average person, citizens, because the solutions to the climate crisis must come from the bottom up. The pressure on policymakers must come from voters and from average citizens. But I'm very glad that policymakers and political leaders around the world have been seeing this movie. And in the countries where it has opened, the reaction has been fantastic. And I'm very excited about the movie opening soon here in Mexico.
So as you say, there's a need for people to understand what's happening with climate change so that we can make the correct decisions for people and for the planet. Do you think this movie will help people and decision makers to see the connection between climate change and climate justice?
Yes.
Climate justice and social justice.
Yes. One of the points made in the movie is that the poorest in every country, the most disadvantaged in every country, are the ones most affected by the climate crisis. I quote the Holy Father, Pope Francis, from his encyclical Laudato Si', where he makes this point repeatedly. And I have seen it in my own experience all over the world. So climate justice and social justice are intimately connected. In my country and in many countries, those citizens who have less political influence and wealth to defend themselves against environmental damage are frequently the victims because the hazardous chemical waste sites are located near their communities, the smokestacks are put just upwind from their communities, because people with more influence and wealth are more able to say, no, you can't affect us this way. And actually, those with the least influence are the next generation. And what we are doing with the climate crisis is a question of social injustice and environmental injustice aimed by the present generation on the next and all future generations. So we need to recognize the moral responsibility that we have to take care of those who come after us. That is sometimes a difficult concept, but in spite of the limitations of our human nature, we know that we do have the ability to rise above our limitations and take a more expansive view in determining to do the right thing instead of the wrong thing.
So now, knowing the huge social implications of climate change, what would you say is specific to the solutions that need to be implemented in developing economics, such as Mexico, with growing cities and growing consumption rates?
Yes. Developing economies, and of course Mexico is a fast-growing emerging economy with a fantastic future ahead of it. But in developing and emerging economies, there is an even greater opportunity to quickly adopt renewable energy and other new technologies of the 21st century instead of repeating the mistakes that the industrial countries made over the last 150 years. And in many countries, you could say this about Mexico City as well. You can certainly say it in the cities of India and China, Paris, and many countries. The amount of air pollution that is also produced at the same time the global warming pollution is produced from the burning of fossil fuels. Air pollution is becoming a big political issue. In China, the Communist Party, now just having its periodic leadership gathering, they are facing tremendous political unrest from the victims of air pollution in their cities. The same is true in India. And now it is possible to get these very inexpensive air quality monitors, the 2.5 ppm monitors, and the information goes up on the internet, and parents of children who have asthma or who have lung diseases, who have poor health, are demanding a cleanup of the air pollution. In northern China, life expectancy has gone down 5.5 years just from air pollution. So developing countries and fast-growing countries are anxious to deal with this air pollution problem. Secondly, in the movie, you will see an analogy between what happened with cell phones and what is now happening with solar panels and wind energy. With cell phones, the spread of this technology was so rapid it took the business community by surprise. But when you look at the statistics, the growth in the wealthy countries was this much, but in the developing countries, that much, because the developing countries did not have the landline telephone grids. They could leapfrog to the new technology. The same thing is true of electricity. The electricity grids in many parts of the developing world are very poor. In India, there are almost as many people with no electricity at all as the entire population of the United States. So it makes no sense for them to build out this big electricity grid for coal-fired power plants that create yet more pollution when they can now go straight to solar. And by the way, 150 years ago and 100 years ago, if the United States had had this very cheap solar energy available, we would have gone straight to that in the first place instead of creating all this pollution.
So with all these opportunities we see to stop climate change, what would you like people to do after they see your movie? What can we do as individuals, especially in a country where we have such a robust climate change legislation already in place?
Well, I compliment the Mexican people on empowering your political leaders to actually adopt some very advanced legislation that is making Mexico one of the leaders in the global community. As for your question, what can individuals do? Take action. 3 things. Use your voice, use your vote, use your choices in life. Using your voice means winning the conversations about climate. And in those conversations, connect the dots between the climate-related extreme events that are becoming so much more common and so much more destructive. All social revolutions begin in conversations. Secondly, using your vote means supporting political candidates and elected officials who are willing to do the right thing about solving the climate crisis, and saying to those who are tempted to do the wrong thing, watch out, because we're aware, we're watching you, and we're going to hold you accountable, and if you do the wrong thing, we'll do everything in our power to vote you out of office. Number 3, use your choices, including in the marketplace. Excuse me. Because when you insist upon a more environmentally responsible and climate-friendly alternative, then that not only helps you become part of the solution, it sends a powerful signal to business and industry and engineers and designers that there is a growing market for these climate-friendly alternatives. And in fact, consumers around the world are now putting pressure on businesses, and businesses, you will see for yourselves in almost every sector, they're advertising, we're greener than our competition. And that's because they're feeling it from their customers, they're feeling it from their employees, from their families, from their executive teams. And when they go out to hire the best and brightest young men and women who are coming into the workplace, what they're finding is that this next generation wants to make a good salary, but they also want to be working for a company that is about more than money and makes them feel as if their values are aligned and they are making the world a better place.
So now I would like to talk about the grassroots part of the work that you do, the Climate Reality Leadership Corps program that you talk a lot about in your film, where you train leaders across the globe to take action against climate change. And I think everybody will want to know, are you planning to host a training event in Mexico in anytime soon?
I have had 36 large trainings. We've trained almost 14,000 grassroots climate activists all around the world now. I came here from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where the world's first oil well was drilled 150 years ago. And you may recall, some of you will recall, that when President Trump made his speech on climate last March, he said, I'm president for Pittsburgh, not Paris. Yeah. And the next day, the mayor of Pittsburgh said, wait a minute, I'm the mayor of Pittsburgh, and we're still in the Paris Agreement. They have now twice as many jobs in solar as in coal. Solar jobs in the U.S. are growing 17 times faster than other jobs in the economy. The single fastest growing job is wind turbine technician. So I'm sorry to elaborate, but I've just come from this 3-day training. So in answer to your question, yes, there will be a training in Mexico. I'm very excited. We're going to train a large group of climate activists in Mexico City, March 21, March 22, March 23 of next year.
I'm sure your guidance will be very valuable for new leaders and also for politicians. And now that you talk about the Paris Agreement, in the film we see that you were there. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll give it back to you if you want.
Thank you. So could you share with us your experience in Paris? You showed us in the movie the real drama that is lived in international negotiations. What was the tensest part for you during that process? Well,
there were 2 tense parts of that negotiation. One was the effort to establish a long-term goal. And many of us felt that was really important, and the leaders of the conference asked me to run that process. And we succeeded in getting a long-term goal that every country in the world, except Syria and Donald Trump, agreed to go to net zero global warming pollution by mid-century. That's a really important goal, but it was difficult and it was tense. But now that we have that goal, the train has left the station. Every nation virtually is on board. Investors are making decisions accordingly. The other tense part was the deep concern on the part of the conference, the people in charge of the conference, that India would not agree. China was one of the leaders, and 1 year before the Paris conference, then President Obama and the Chinese President Xi Jinping shook hands and agreed that the U.S. and China would work together. India's economy is smaller than that of China by a lot, but it is growing faster than China, and its population will soon be larger than that of China within the decade. So the decisions made by India were very important, and before the conference they were very reluctant to agree to an ambitious climate agreement. But many people took part in helping to change India's mind, and ultimately they did change. And by the way, since the Paris Agreement, India has made a dramatic change in its policies. They've closed 37 coal mines this year. They have stopped construction on some of the coal-burning plants. They have vastly expanded their solar panel installations. And they just announced that within only 12 years, 100% of all of the new cars and trucks sold in India must, by law, be electric vehicles. So they are really moving quickly.
So you're always talking about hope, and now we see why there's reason for hope now more than ever. And I would like to ask you this question also. Many people see you as a hero, including myself, I must admit. Yeah. And I would like to ask you, what was the biggest adventure you had while filming this movie? We see you riding boats and helicopters and even the Paris subway, helping break the impasse in the Paris negotiations. What was like the biggest adventure?
Well, first of all, I don't want to accept the label of hero. I work in Silicon Valley a lot, and I have a battery-powered hubris alarm, a new device, and it's vibrating when you use that word, so alarming me. The scenes in Greenland were very dramatic. The glaciers were literally exploding. You can see it in the movie because the temperatures are so high there. Emotionally, it was very moving to talk with some of the victims of the super typhoon called Haiyan that hit the Philippines there. There were many other times in the movie where I became very emotional. Dealing with some of those struggling with the Zika epidemic, for example, really touched my heart. Speaking of super typhoons, I just read on the news that a super typhoon is heading for Tokyo right now. The wind speed is now 300 kilometers per hour, and it is aiming directly at Tokyo Bay. And a large American military base is at the entrance to the bay, and 37 million people in Tokyo. It is due to hit Tokyo less than 24 hours from right now, about 4 p.m. Mexico time tomorrow. So we should have them in our thoughts and prayers.
Thank you, Mr. Gore. Oh, okay.
You agree? Okay. Sure. Vamos a abrirlo ahora a preguntas y respuestas por parte del vicepresidente. ¿Quién quiere hacer la La primera pregunta, aquí está, perdón. Gracias. Si se pueden identificar, por favor.
Sí. Hi, Mr. Gore. Mariana Mijares from Esquire magazine. It seems nowadays that you can make a movie each year to include huge climate crises such as Houston, Puerto Rico, and the California fires. What do you think is needed for more people, and especially leaders, not only to understand but to act upon climate change?
Well, that's the whole purpose of this movie, to contribute to the momentum that is already underway. And you're right, the frequency and severity of these climate-related extreme events is just extraordinary. In the last month, we had 3 giant hurricanes impact the U.S., and the part of the U.S. that is Puerto Rico is still suffering tremendously, with 80% of the people without electricity even a month later, 30% and more without fresh drinking water, some of them tragically looking for drinking water at chemical waste sites. How can this be allowed to happen? And in Houston, 5 feet of rain, what is that? 1.5 meters of rain, a once in a 25,000 year event. All of those statistical tables have to be rewritten now. And then Hurricane Irma and the Caribbean islands and Cuba. We didn't get much news from Cuba, but they were devastated as well. And then the fires. In fact, one of the guests at the opening premiere last night was threatened by the fires and had to cancel at the last minute. Every night on the television news is now like a nature hike through the book of Revelation. It is really quite extraordinary. And Mother Nature is has a persuasive voice. And people are connecting the dots. They are realizing this. There was a study reported from Houston, Texas, just 3 days ago, including interviews with people who used to be climate deniers in Houston, who are now saying, I see it now. These events we've been warned about are coming more frequently. Houston, by the way, has had 5 major catastrophes in the last 2 years. They have had 3 once in 500-year floods, 2 once in 1,000-year downpours. Again, the other was once in 25,000 years. And so after a while, people do realize that this really must be responded to. But in addition to these extreme weather events, there is also this fantastic momentum we were discussing a moment ago. As the price of electricity from solar and wind comes down so quickly, and as batteries become much more affordable. I was in Nevada last week, where Elon Musk is building the largest battery factory in the world. When it's completed, it will be the largest building on planet Earth and will produce 50% of all the lithium-ion batteries in the world. And the cost is coming down so quickly. Not far from Houston, Texas, is the city of Georgetown, Texas, also featured in the movie, where the mayor is a conservative Republican supporter of Donald Trump, but he happens to be a certified public accountant. He's very good with arithmetic. And he saw that his citizens could save money if he switched over to renewable energy. They have now completed the transition. I will fly from Morelia back to Georgetown, Texas, to give a slideshow to all of the utility district heads throughout the entire state of Texas. One other brief note, I mentioned this to a few people earlier. In the heart of coal country in Kentucky, there is a famous coal museum. They just switched to solar energy to save money.
That's a lot. Muy bien, vamos a la segunda pregunta. Aquí, adelante.
Columba de la revista Proceso. Me gustaría saber cuándo le va a mostrar a Donald Trump La Verdad Incómoda 2 y si cree que pueda sensibilizarlo esta vez ante la problemática del clima del mundo.
La pregunta era ¿cuánto le va a costar a Donald
No.
Trump? ¿Cuánto le va a quedar?
Que cuándo va a mostrarle La Verdad Incómoda 2. a Donald
When
Trump.
are you going to show an Inconvenient sequel to Donald Trump? And if you think that will make him conscious of the problem.
When will I show the movie to Donald Trump? I had a lot of conversations with Donald Trump after he was elected and after he went into the White House. And I actually thought there was a realistic chance that he would come to his senses, but I was wrong. And since he made his speech on the Paris Agreement, I haven't been in any further contact with him. I'm not going to waste any more time on it. Maybe some others can succeed where I could not, but I won't hold my breath. I think that he has surrounded himself with polluters and special interests who seem to not care at all about the public interest. And if somebody shows him the movie, great. I hope they do. But I don't have much hope that he will change his mind. I hope I'm wrong.
Muy bien. Ahí atrás, por favor.
Sí, acá, señor Gore. Eduardo Herrera, de Cine Secuencia, Cine. En su película se dice que como especie llevamos 150 años quemando hidrocarburos, aceite, petróleo. Obviamente llevamos un poco más de tiempo extrayéndolo. En sus investigaciones no ha encontrado usted una correlación entre esta desmedida extracción de hidrocarburos y la creciente frecuencia de terremotos y su alza en magnitud también.
I think she can try. Do you have a microphone? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So my question is, for the last 150 years, we have been burning hydrocarbons, and we have been extracting them for perhaps longer time than that. My question is whether your research has shown that there is a correlation between the extraction of hydrocarbons from the earth and a higher frequency of earthquakes and the magnitude of the earthquakes.
Well, first of all, I would like to express my deep condolences to the families of the victims of the horrible earthquake in Mexico City so recently, and to the families of those who have lost loved ones, to the victims who are injured and still attempting to recover fully, and to all of those who have been impacted by this terrible tragedy. Now, the relationship between hydrocarbon extraction and earthquakes is a complicated one. Generally speaking, yes, there have been a lot of smaller earthquakes associated with the process known as fracking, hydrological fracking, because when they pump the fluids, chemicals and water down into the earth, that can cause some small earthquakes. Most of them are magnitude 3 or less. And of course, the magnitude of the Mexico City earthquake was much larger, and it's a logarithmic scale, and it's above my pay grade. But you know that small number increases mean a big increase in the strength of the earthquakes. I do not know of any connection between hydrocarbon extraction and the large earthquakes. There may be one, but I do not know of it. Generally speaking, there is no connection between the climate crisis and the large earthquakes that happen around the world, usually along these fault lines. There are some examples of ice melting, changing the depression of the land masses where the ice has disappeared, and there is some evidence that can be connected again to some small earthquakes. But the large earthquakes, as far as I know, have absolutely no connection to either the climate crisis or hydrocarbon extraction.
Muy bien, vamos a la última pregunta. A ver el micrófono. A ver si que... Ok, bueno.
Two more.
Nos las tomamos rápido. Primero la señora que tiene el micrófono y luego si le pasan el micrófono y con esas concluimos. Gracias.
Hi, I'm Linda Cruz from Fullscreen Latin America here. In America, our continent, Chile is making a big difference due to emissions. What are they doing to make this difference, and what can our country do?
Chile has fantastic policy. They also have a fantastic president in Michelle Bachelet. This is the second time she has been president. She was president for 2 terms a couple of decades ago. She invited me to Santiago during her first term as president and organized a huge conference with business leaders, environmentalists, and others. And we had a wonderful presentation of what the crisis is, what the solutions are. Then she ended her term and she was out of office for a while. When she came back for her second time as president, she immediately began implementing excellent policies to remove the subsidies for fossil fuels and to encourage the advancement of solar energy in particular, also wind. They also have an area, the Atacama, I think it is called, Atacama, an altoplano, where the insolation, the amount of sunlight it's one of the best in the entire world. And so they started building solar panels there, and they were amazed at how much electricity they were producing. And it was cheaper than electricity from anything else. And so they have rapidly expanded their commitment to solar energy. And they are really one of the great leaders of the world now in this transition. They will soon be selling large amounts of renewable electricity to their neighbors in South America. And other nations in South America have taken notice of this and are now beginning to follow Chile's lead. And I'm very excited about what's happening there. As I often say, we are now in the early stages of a worldwide sustainability revolution that has the scale and magnitude of the Industrial Revolution, but has the speed of the digital revolution. And it's empowered in part by the digital tools that are available now, including the Internet of Things. And the engineers and technologists and business managers are now acquiring the ability to keep track of molecules and atoms the same way the information and computer companies have learned to keep track of bits of information. The level of precision is something entirely new. And the ability to eliminate wasted energy, wasted materials, to come up with new designs and new business plans that are far more efficient. We have seen the decoupling of CO2 emissions and economic growth. And this happened in California early on. It's now happening all around the world. Global emissions have now stabilized for 3 years in a row with no increase. This will be the 4th year, and they're starting to come down a little bit. We have to get them to come down very quickly, but we now have the solutions available to do that, and Chile is helping to lead the way.
Muy bien, vamos a la última pregunta.
Sí, Sergio Raúl López de la revista Cinetoma. Primero, felicitarlos por las 2 películas, ¿no?, que han tenido un gran impacto mundial. Pero quisiera preguntarle, ahora que conoció la industria del cine y el poder de la cultura audiovisual, ¿dónde diría digamos, en el armado geopolítico actual tan movible, donde Estados Unidos no es la gran potencia que solía ser, dónde tiene usted más influencia? ¿Dónde encuentra usted que hay más influencia? ¿En la Casa Blanca o en la industria audiovisual de Hollywood? Esa es mi primera pregunta. Y la segunda, muy breve, ¿cómo combatir los grandes intereses económicos de los corporativos internacionales que realmente son los que han impedido Por ejemplo, que cambiemos con mayor rapidez los vehículos de gasolina o impulsados por energías no renovables. Gracias.
Gracias.
First and foremost, I would like to commend you for your two movies and for the impact that they have had in the world. Secondly, I would like to ask you that now that you have realized the power of filmmaking and the power of audiovisuals, and in a world where geopolitics are changing and the United States are no longer the superpower they used to be, I would like to ask you, where do you believe you have more influence? At the White House, or would you have more influence in Hollywood through audiovisuals? And the other question that I have is, how would you fight the economic interests of large corporations? Because we see that sometimes these large corporations have hindered the advancement of climate policy, or, for example, by preventing that we change cars and move from oil-fueled cars to maybe electric cars, for example.
Yeah. Gracias. Thank you for your kind words about both of the movies. And in response to the first part of your question, I am not under any illusion that there is any position with as much potential to bring good positive change as the position of President of the United States. Sometimes people say, are you able to do more now? I think that a lot could have been done in that position. Winston Churchill, when he was a young man, lost an election, and one of his friends said, Winston, this is a blessing in disguise. And he said, damn good disguise. That's the way I feel. But I am very grateful, deep in my heart, for having found the ability and the opportunity to continue working for positive change outside of the political system. So it gives me a feeling of joy to have work that is worthy of pouring every bit of energy that I have into it. And what was the second part of his question?
The second part of the question is, how could one fight the economic interest?
Okay, I have it. Well, this is a huge problem, maybe especially in the U.S., but in many other places as well. And it is unfortunate that in the age of electronic communication, money plays a very big role in politics. To some extent it always has, but in prior eras, especially when everybody relied mainly on newspapers and magazines and the printed word, it was easier for individuals without a lot of money and support from wealthy corporations to use ideas and knowledge and the best available evidence to connect with citizens and say, here is my proposal, here is why it makes sense. And people were more willing to respond on that basis. And now in the internet age, we see with the Russian trolling of fake news and the corporate trolling of fake news, that it's an even more serious problem. We have to do something about it, because the promise of representative democracy can be redeemed when the people reclaim control of the political process. In my country, there are now some proposals being debated to require that each of these messages be labeled according to who's paid for them. I think that's a good idea. But I also think that we have reason to hope that with social media, there may be a spontaneous set of remedies that emerge. Last year in my country, the election was a messy, troubling affair. We're learning more about it all the time. But there was one positive sign. Bernie Sanders, and here I am not talking about his proposals or his agenda. I supported some of what he proposed. I didn't support other things. But the nature of his campaign gave me hope for this reason. He proved that we have now reached a stage of development with the internet where it is now possible to run a massively funded national campaign without any lobbyist contributions, without any big corporate contributions, by instead relying only on small contributions from millions of people over the internet. I hope and pray that this model for running elections will be tried again and that it will be effective at the regional level and the local level, and that future campaigns will be far less dependent on the money that's always there for these made available by the carbon polluters, for example, or the tobacco companies, or the drug companies who want to keep the prices so high. So I'm hopeful that we can reclaim our democracy. And by the way, in the movie, as some of you who've seen it know, I make the point that in order to solve the climate crisis, we have to spend time fixing the democracy crisis. And average people who get involved can contribute to those solutions. Before we close, Alejandro, I just wanted to note what a beautiful space this is, and I want to compliment the people of Morelia for what I understand are requirements that these beautiful old structures have to be honored and respected. They don't build them like this anymore, and it's a beautiful space. I'm very grateful to all of you for coming to this press conference. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, señor vicepresidente. Gracias. Muchas gracias. Con eso damos por concluido. Gracias.